Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. All throughout the month of November, each and every day, we're going to be bringing you a new review from the Gaming Gang. Now, it's possible it'll be a written review over on thegaminggang.com, or it may be a video review from yours truly here on YouTube. But each and every day of the month, we are going to do our damnedest to get you a brand new review for you to peruse. All right, having said that, today's review is going to be the 5th edition of Chivalry and Sorcery from Britannia Game Designs Ltd. This is written by Stephen Turner, Francis Tiffany, Andy Staples, Colin D. Spears, A.R. Cowley, and David Blewett. And I apologize if I've mispronounced any of those names. The 600-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $75 for the full color edition, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $29.99. I should also mention you can get a black and white edition of the hardcover from DriveThruRPG for $49.99, but we are taking a peek at the full color edition. Having said that, let's swing on over to the other camera so we can see that full color edition. First of all, I received this copy for review, but keep in mind, neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other compensation outside of this book to provide you with this review. And these days, it's very important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every of the 600 pages in this volume, but I do want to give you a very good idea of what you're going to find inside Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a peek at the credits page because there are a lot of folks who worked very hard to bring this to life. This successfully crowdfunded, and this hit the market in 2019. Now, I do remember Chivalry and Sorcery when it was from Fantasy Games Unlimited. I don't know if I remember seeing what they call, I think it's Red Book, it's referred to as. I do remember the box set, though. Did take a peek at it. I never owned it. Somebody I knew owned it. I remember taking a look through it, and I was very interested because I actually liked the various different FGU role-playing games that were out, like Bushido. I think Bushido is a fantastic game. Space Opera wasn't too shabby. It was all right as far as a science fiction role-playing game. But as far as Chivalry and Sorcery, I never really got into it. Now, of course, this role-playing game does have a reputation of being possibly the crunchiest, the most rules-dense fantasy role-playing games out there on the market. And I will discuss that a little bit in this review. Now, I will say that this is probably the most detailed fantasy role-playing game core book that I've ever seen. Or maybe it's one of the most detailed. But this book is just packed with content. You're not going to find instances of full page art splashes or spreads across 2 pages. Nope. In fact, you'll see that there's artwork throughout, but it's not overflowing with art. And the artwork's fairly uniform. I will point out it's not maybe necessarily the most exciting artwork you're going to encounter as far as a fantasy role-playing game, but it certainly does not distract or detract from this core rulebook. But like I said, this is just absolutely packed with content. All you need to play and or run Chivalry and Sorcery is contained inside this volume. So you've got all the rules of play, all the character creation information. You've got the tips and tricks for game masters. We've got the magic, both arcane and religious based. We've got a bestiary that clocks in at about 80 pages. So everything you need is contained within. Gotta say, about 80 pages are devoted to character creation too. This is not going to be a game that you get together and you're going to do your session 0 and create characters. And that takes hour and a half. And all, okay, hey, we're going to jump on into the adventure. Nope. You are going to spend your session 0 diving into the character creation. And when you're finished, you are really going to understand your character. It's important to note that this is a fantasy role playing game, but it is a fantasy role playing game that is supposed to be set during Earth's own Middle Ages. And I know folks out there, some folks don't like that term Middle Ages because it's like, okay, the middle of what? And I see where they're coming from. It's like the Dark Ages. People say, oh, the Dark Ages. And it's like, well, no, it really wasn't that dark. There were a lot of inventions, a lot of scientific discoveries and things like that going on. It wasn't as if it was just a world of intellectual darkness by any stretch. But that is the era that this takes place, kind of in the early feudal era. Now, of course, this is a fantasy land, so it isn't like, oh, well, it's England and Germany. No, none of that. But it is kind of set in a world that's got a Catholic church, or well, I guess we'd say Christian church because it's only Catholics as far as the Christians. We have the Jewish faith, we have Islam as well. And I think it's kind of cool too that we also have magic that ties into that. So we have magic like our traditional high fantasy magic users would be casting. And then we also have various different religious spells and rituals for more clerical characters to utilize, which are actually tied into these major religions. This is an absolutely fascinating setting. It really is. If you are somebody out there who enjoys Harnworld, then Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition is going to be right up your alley. It is the sort of game that you're probably looking for as far as the complexity and the detail that has gone into not only the background, but also the mechanics of Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. It's important to keep in mind that the core mechanic of Chivalry and Sorcery is relatively easy. It's D100. So you're rolling percentile dice. You're looking to roll equal to or lower than a particular number based upon your attributes or your skills. Now it gets trickier than that. So it's not like basic role playing. So it's not as easy to calculate the numbers that you're looking to roll equal to or lower than. But in essence, that's essentially the core mechanic. Now you're also going to roll an additional 10-sided die. It's the crit die. And if you roll a 10, it is a critical. Now, of course, you're going to roll that in combat. You're also going to roll that when you're just looking to use a skill and you're rolling dice to resolve success or failure. So, lots going on here. Is it overly complex? I think that's the big question that people are curious about. How complex is Chivalry and Sorcery really? And the way I would explain it is it's not necessarily complex once you understand what's driving the game. So, as an example, we have different skills, we've got attributes, we have a really detailed character sheet. And coming up with the various different skills and understanding the difference with something that is unskilled or skilled and the experience points, which you can use to raise your skills, just at a glance seems probably overly complex. But the reality is, it's not, it's just really different. And like I said, I know I'm going to refer to this a few times. I know a lot of folks out there, they want that level of complexity. They really do dig the detailed subsystems of various different relatively complex role playing games out there. They don't want something to just be resolved in a single 20 sided die roll the same way, regardless of what you're attempting to do. That's not the case with Chivalry and Sorcery. So keep that in mind. So we're going to have various different skills, and they're pretty detailed. As far as combat goes, combat is relatively crunchy, but once again, it's going to utilize those same core mechanics. Plus, you also have action points. And I got to say, I think the action points really do add a lot to the combat, making things tactical and very interesting, as opposed to, okay, so I'm just rolling to hit. All right, I'm just going to wait and hold off on taking my action until I have an opportunity. And then I'm going to take, there's a lot going on. So the funny thing too is you don't just spend all of your action points to do something. You spend some to take an action, and then next in line for initiatives going to spend points to take an action, and then so on and so on till it comes back around to you. And if you still have action points left, you can take another action. So I like that quite a bit. And it really does seem to me that it's going to make combat feel very fluid, that it's not just the same roll to hit, missed. Next, roll to hit, 4 points damage, so on and so forth. It's also important to keep in mind armor does not make you more difficult to hit. Armor absorbs damage, which is the reality of what armor does. So I like that quite a bit. The magic aspect of Chivalry and Sorcery takes up about 180 pages, 175 pages or so. There is a lot going on because we not only have, in fact, I landed right on the page. We've got methods of magic, and then we have modes of magic. They're different. So, depending on the sort of magic a magic user is going to utilize, is going to determine both the methods as well as the modes. So, I thought that was really interesting. As far as clerics, shaman, and so forth, religious magic users, this utilizes real world religions. But the funny thing is, if you look at this period of time, people thought, all these different things were magic and were caused by demons, the will of God, and all these other things. And that comes into play. Now, I will say that this is not necessarily a low fantasy setting. There is elements of high fantasy, especially with the magical spells and rituals and so forth. So keep that in mind, because I know some folks out there think that Chivalry and Sorcery is what is considered to be a low fantasy setting where we don't really have too many monsters and magic isn't very prevalent. Now, granted, magic isn't as prevalent as you would find in, say, Faerun or Glorantha. Of course not. But then again, it's also not as rare as you would see in, say, Arthurian legend, right? Where very few characters in those stories actually have any sort of access to magic. This is also not Tolkien styled magic. Speaking of magic, also, this is not Vancian styled magic. And I know a lot of folks will be very excited to hear that. But you also don't have an unending flow of magic either. So magic does cost fatigue. Magic does cost actual body points to cast. So you're not going to find that magic users can just be casting spells all willy-nilly all over the place. But then again, you're not going to find a situation where a magic user casts a spell and suddenly like, well, I don't remember it anymore. Well, at least until I rest for 30 minutes. So do like that also. I'm really impressed by 5th edition Chivalry and Sorcery. I'll be the first to point out this wouldn't be my go-to fantasy role-playing game, though. I think if you follow the gaming gang, you already know that I now gravitate more towards rules light, or at least rules lighter role-playing games. Call of Cthulhu is probably the extent of rules complexity I want to run as a game master. And of course, I'm so used to Call of Cthulhu. I've been running it for over 40 years. So I am used to those mechanics. So a lot of that comes naturally. But I could see someone who's looking to have a far more detailed fantasy role playing experience really gravitate towards Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition quite easily. As far as our fantasy races for characters, they are present, they are not prevalent. So, like your elves and dwarves, yes, you can certainly roll up a character as far as elves and dwarves and other species, but they do tend to be rather unique. So, it's important to keep that in mind. So, I've just been paging through all the magic as I've been talking for the last few moments here, because as I mentioned, as far as we've got the arcane magic, and then we also have the religion, take up about 175, 180 pages. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Then we'll get into more of the Game Master's Guide, kind of providing some tips and advice as far as running Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. I should also point out this game has been around for well over 40 years. So there is a good amount of content out there. I do not know how compatible the 5th edition of Chivalry and Sorcery is with earlier editions. I do think maybe 3rd, 4th, and 5th are similar in certain ways. I had heard that 5th edition actually brought back some complexity to the system. Now, I could be absolutely wrong, but that is what I've kind of heard through the grapevine. So here we've got our Game Master section. We start getting into a gazetteer about the game world, which is very interesting. Once again, it is a fantastical middle-age Earth without actually being Earth. But I thought that was kind of cool. If you are looking at Chivalry and Sorcery and you're thinking, hey, you know what? I would look at picking this up because I want to run Arthurian legend role-playing games. You could easily do that. Truthfully, I would probably point you in the direction of Pendragon, the latest edition of Pendragon from Chaosium Inc., because it really does that exceptionally well. I mean, it's designed to be a Malorian, Arthurian role-playing experience, where that's not exactly what Chivalry and Sorcery is aiming for. Chivalry and Sorcery is aiming more towards a realistic fantasy setting as opposed to courtly love and Merlin and Morgan Le Fay essentially being your only magic users. I know, there's a few more than that, but not as widespread. That is not the approach of Chivalry and Sorcery. Like, as an example, in Pendragon, you're not playing magic using characters. You play as knights. That's what you play as. So we've got our bestiary, and then we've got all of our stat blocks, as you can see, for all the various different creatures. So there's lots in here as far as monsters. Okay, granted, you're not going to see a lot of images for them. And for the most part, you're seeing just mainly stat blocks, but still, there's loads in here. All right, so that is a peek inside Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. from Britannia Game Designs Ltd. If you want to get a closer look, I did a first look video where we took a little bit of a deeper dive into CNS 5e. So you might want to take a peek at that. All right, so let's swing on over to the other camera because I'm going to share some final thoughts and give this a review score. So I'm impressed by Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. Once again, it's probably far more deep than I would want to delve at my game table, but that's just my personal preference these days. I tend to go, especially with fantasy role-playing games, I tend to try to aim a bit more rules light, just the way I like to do it. But if you are looking for those additional levels of complexity, of detail, really, if you're looking for subsystems where you're not just sitting there rolling, oh, okay, it's 20-sided die and I have to roll 15 or higher. It's a DC of 15. And every time I do anything, I'm just rolling a 20-sided die, try to roll 15 or higher or whatever. No, you're going to have a lot more detail, a lot more substance to your action resolution in Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. Is it overly complex? No. Once the players and game master wrap their heads around the core mechanics and the various different subsystems, you will get the hang of the game. This is not a role-playing game, though, that you're going to learn in a session or two and like run with. It's going to take you a while because this is different and this is detailed. But I think those of you out there who enjoy a very detailed setting, who are maybe looking for kind of a historical fantasy role-playing game setting, or those out there who are looking for more of a realistic approach to combat, even magic, trying to get away from that Vancian magic that's prevalent in so many fantasy role-playing games, I honestly think you're really going to like Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. I do have a major critique, though. I do have to float out there. This needed another pass through. This needed another round of proofreading, at least this volume, because there are things that aren't necessarily as clear as they could be. There are sections that you're going to be reading and you're going to say, why am I not getting that? Why is that not clicking? Now, there is a link that is going to answer about 100 questions about Chivalry and Sorcery. I actually relied upon to go take a peek at because I had a lot of questions as I was reading through this core book. So I am actually going to share that link in the show notes. But the reality is a 600-page hardcover book shouldn't have that. It's okay. You have a typo here and there. There's a few things where it's like, okay, so that's not exactly clear. Or maybe it could have been presented differently or maybe a little more intuitively. Sure. But this really did need another pass. I get the feeling that this was a case because obviously enough, I'm sure there aren't a ton of people who are working for Britannia Game Designs Ltd. I'm sure it's just a handful of people. It's probably the 5 authors, if even that many. I'm taking a guess. The proofreading probably was in-house. And it's a well-known fact as a game designer, looking at the same thing over and over and over again, you're not going to pick up on the things that need to be tweaked or changed or cleaned up and so forth. So, yeah, sadly enough, there's a lot of frequently asked questions for Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition, but I don't want you to avoid picking this up because of that. I'm just mentioning if we see another edition come out somewhere down the line, that hopefully they clean up a lot of the ambiguities, I guess I'll say, for a good number of topics in the core rulebook. Anyway, I do like Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. I think the right crowd out there exists. And there are people who are going to absolutely adore Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. Just like I'm sure there are going to be folks out there who will absolutely despise Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition and trying to read through the book or trying to learn how to play the game. Their heads may explode, literally. But all in all, I will recommend Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the 5th edition of Chivalry and Sorcery a 7 out of 10. I liked it. Could have gotten a far higher score if this edition had been proofread better. But still, I do like it. I do recommend it. All right, that's it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. If you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because not only will it let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, once again, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe, because I am on a quest, I say, to reach 15,000 subscribers before the calendar turns to 2025. Let's see if we can get there together. All right, that's it for this time out. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. Until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.